Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of The InBetween. A nice and interesting series premiere. It's kind of nice immediately getting into this whole situation. I appreciate we start off with Cassie's thing because that was a big thing going into this. I'm wondering how her whole situation works. And it seems like we're still 100% unclear because it seems like there might be varying levels to it. Because I was wondering, because I was thinking, okay, when she does her thing, I was thinking maybe when she's communicating with ghosts, she goes over into another plane of existence. So that's what I was thinking. But it seems like it's more so a vision, but that vision does seem like it takes her to obviously at the beginning it's oh, here's a freezer on the beach and there's that little boy and his mom inside. But it turns out that has nothing to do with the missing girl right now, Shannon Bell. But later on, it turns out it does because Shannon Bell's eyes are missing like the woman she saw. So now it turns into a situation. Because even, it's oh, maybe it's that situation of okay, so her visions or whatever, maybe it's they're meant to be taken for interpretation. But then later on, it's no, it seems like her visions are exact because what she ends up seeing later on is oh, Shannon Bell got taken in her own place. Someone was underneath waiting and dragged her and chloroformed her, and it's okay. So, but that's interesting though because it's her first vision was from a third person perspective. Her second vision was kind of more so from her perspective. It's she took the place. So I'm wondering, depending on whatever it is the spirits are trying to tell her, whatever the spirits or the universe are trying to tell her, I think that determines the perspective of it. Because I guess depending on what triggers it, because obviously she was just, the first one kind of triggered on its own when she was in the store, heard something over the intercom that kind of triggered that. Well, she was taking a shower during the second one, so I guess it put her in such a similar state, I guess it triggered a more out-of-body experience of her kind of recreating the situation. So like I said, it's these are beginning steps. We still haven't 100% quite figured it out. But it is a very interesting case with everything. Obviously, she's very close to the detective Tom, who is played by Paul Blackthorne. Is that it? Yes, I believe so. Obviously, one of the things earliest I've come to know him for was it the Dresden Files? It's a really good show. Sadly, it was very short-lived. But obviously, other than that, most recently would be him on Arrow, where he played Quentin Lance. I guess it's kind of spoilers since he's doing this show, but I think that in itself is kind of spoilers. But obviously, Quentin's no longer, in the show, so there. But it's also interesting because, this is the first show I've seen him do his natural accent. I'd never heard his accent until years later. I think it's still fairly recently was the first time I'd ever heard his natural accent. So it's pretty dope that he's actually using his natural accent and not putting on an American accent for the show. I'm oh, that's kind of crazy. It's kind of interesting, kind of breaking a lot of stuff down about this. Also, the actress who plays the lieutenant, I've seen that actress in so many different things. The thing I think I kind of first know her from was she played Janine's mom in the TV show House of Pains. So it's just kind of interesting little things like that. I'm holy crap. Also, Tom's husband. I've seen that actor. He played, well, I say husband, but I don't know what their situation is. So for now, we'll just call him, Tom's significant other. Was his name Brian? I've seen that actor in so much stuff. I don't know his name, but he's one of those actors you see all the time. I was It's kind of interesting because obviously we know Tom has a foster situation with Cassie, but beyond that, we don't really know too many details at this point in time. But obviously, her situation is something, Tom and Brian have kind of dealt with. And I like Brian's perspective of being maybe the universe or spirits or whatever will stop tapping into her. If you stop using what she uses, and then it's the universe is giving it an outlet, maybe they won't use Cassie anymore. But for him, it's for Tom, it's I have to. These are murder investigations. I have to use what she gives me. I know how much it hurts you. It hurts me to do this, to put her in that position. And what's interesting, too, is Cassie's perspective on this. She's so nonchalant about it. Most people would kind of be struggling with it. She just kind of plays it off. But I guess for her, it's she's probably dealt with maybe her entire life. Once again, that's something we gotta really dive into going forward, hopefully, of when did this first pop up and how did this happen? Did she have a near-death experience? Has she always had these powers? What makes her special? Is it something specific to her? Was it something that ran in her family? Because because once again, like Tom and Brian were in a more foster parent type of situation. So what about our biological family? Assuming they died and everything, so it makes you wonder about that type of stuff immediately. But obviously, I'm all over the place. But it was kind of interesting. Like, let me go ahead and talk about the case. I thought it was kind of interesting because obviously it's like, oh, it's the boyfriend. Because I did like that, though, because the whole case was set up to make it go like, okay, she disappeared on, was it like a Tuesday morning or whatever, but no one could catch her kidnapping on surveillance. And it's like, oh, the reason why is because she was taken in her own house Monday night. So the whole point was she was in a bathrobe and everything, but they put her in different clothes so they could continue to mess with the time frame she was kidnapped and everything. And obviously that puts her ex-boyfriend at the top of the suspect list, because obviously at first it's like, oh, he has a good enough alibi, but then later on it's like, oh, what about this new alibi you need for this? It's like, Monday night I was having an affair with my boss's wife, and it's like, yeah, that later on gets confirmed and everything. So I just thought that was kind of like interesting. And then it turns out, the one behind us, and it's kind of sad because this all goes back to some killings that took place in the 90s by this specific dude. And then it turns out the vision that Cassie had seen earlier, turns out that was, it's actually kind of interesting. Just a little side note, just kind of me being stupid. Katie Cassidy played Laurel in Arrow, and it's just kind of interesting because that was his daughter, and obviously this character's name is Cassie, who's kind of like a daughter. It's just interesting to me. That literally just popped in my head. It's such a nonsense thing to really add in there, but it just kind of popped in my head. I was like, oh, I just might as well add that in there. But nevertheless, getting back to what I was saying, but it turns out that vision that Cassie had was kind of from years ago. And so that's so interesting too, because it seems like, once again, her visions aren't necessarily just present day stuff either. That was something from like 2 decades ago at that point in time, over 2 decades. So it's interesting, but I guess it's like depending on what the universal spirits want to show her that's relevant to the case, it's like kind of giving her pieces to a puzzle. Then I guess it's just kind of interesting. You think it'd be something more, but I guess because maybe it's because she's tapping into the killer in some shape or form, kind of understanding him. Maybe like Shannon's spirit or the universe is because it's like, who's showing her these visions? Is it spirits or is it like the universe? Because it's interesting too, because Abigail is like, oh yeah, tell Tom to bring the new guy, and then like you have like, okay, bring the new guy, the new guy from LA, that being Damien, and it's like, okay. So does she only know that because Abigail's kind of a ghost and she's connected like that? Or did she, because we never found out like how in the hell Cassie knew about all that information about him, even though she had never met him. It's just like, oh, literally Tom just met him today. So it's like, how did you find out all that information about him? Was that just Abigail? I mean, because even Abigail was like, oh yeah. Or maybe she had talked to Abigail previously about like, oh yeah, Tom's got a new partner, or, maybe it's the universe being like, oh yeah, because she's connected obviously to Tom, and maybe anyone that's connected to all of this, like who plays some importance, grand scheme of things connected to her and to Tom, maybe it kind of bridges them all together in some like triangle, some like universal triangle or something like that. I have no idea. Like I said, I'm just ballparking a lot of this, but getting back to it, it's kind of sad that, Mark ended up being the killer. He was that little boy who watched his mom die. He ends up inadvertently killing someone the same way. It's actually interesting, like the way like Damien kind of explains the whole thing of like, what was it, unbinding or something? Basically it's like you feel bad for a second because they're alive and they're seeing what you're doing. So it's like, oh, they're experiencing a terrible thing you're doing to them. So you're trying to fix it in some shape or form. But then it's like, why strangle them after you already cut out their eyes and bandaged them up? It's like, because you feel bad for a second and you kind of get over it. But it's just, that was kind of interesting. Obviously, like he's coming from like a FBI, profiler standpoint in the whole situation. So it's even sadder because it's like, oh yeah, Mark ended up becoming, a paramedic and everything too. I mean, it's a sad situation. Apparently that happens from time to time, like when that type of trauma happens, like basically you're looking for any form of control, and he ended up, it twisted him until he became the monster that took his mom away from him. So, and that was his way of kind of asserting control. What's even more messed up is he was even there to make sure. He even talks to Tom to be like, yo, I got your first call we got the moment we got to work at 8. And it's like, yeah, he was there because he had to make sure that the body was found at a specific time to kind of fit this whole fake narrative of time frame that was set up to make it seem like, oh, she was taken at a different point in time than she actually was. So that in itself was interesting. But then like there's so much else kind of spiraling around that I thought was kind of interesting. Like the whole point is that, you know, the lieutenant ends up bringing up the fact is, oh yeah, Damien, he came here for some other reason. It's like even the people in LA were like, oh, we're kind of sad to see him go, but he decided he wanted to come to Seattle and work with Tom specifically. I'm like, there's something there. I mean, later on we find out there's someone named Sally Bishop that's important to him, whether that's like a family member, maybe someone he cares about, but it's like, oh, I'm here now. So it's like, it must have been a recent situation. Because I was like, because even the fact is he wants to work with Tom makes me go, okay, what's that all about? Now part of me wonders, do you think it's some shape or form? And this was what initially went through my mind. Could this all been some long con to work with Tom because he knew about Cassie? He pretends like, oh, I don't know. But I think him, you know, checking her out like that, I think that was him vetting whether or not this is true. He probably found out about it on his own because Tom doesn't parade her around. That's kind of his personal situation because, you know, he doesn't want anyone kind of like, you know, poking and prodding at her and being like, oh, are you real or are you a fake? Like, it's like she already got to deal with enough. It's like, I'll be the liaison with this situation. I'll apply police work to what she brings to me, but I'm not going to bring anyone else into this circle. That's her business. I don't want anyone else intruding on her life and everything. So I thought that was kind of fascinating all on its own. But obviously, like I said, he was kind of a dick to her, like, oh, is this really the case? But it's like, obviously, everything she said, once again, it's more of an interpretation because it's like, oh, there's the singing of the Peter Rabbit song, and then on, you know, Shannon's body, there was a little Peter Rabbit thing, which obviously that song, Peter Rabbit's kind of connected to the killer who was singing it too. So it's a whole thing. So part of me wonders, is that going to be a situation of like, I mean, once a continuation of like, oh yeah, her abilities, is it just like straight up it is what it is, or is it more of like you kind of have to find the wiggle room of like interpreting everything? Nevertheless, but it definitely feels like Damien came here for some specific reason connected to Tom and Cassie. Now whether that ends up being the case going forward, we'll ultimately have to wait and see, but I'm curious to find out what that whole Sally situation is. Obviously Tom doesn't want to tell all his stories and connections, you know, I mean everything about him, even like, oh, the whole situation with Cassie, yeah, that's a foster situation, actually none of your business, and we'll leave it at that. So obviously Damien's got a lot of stuff on his own, but still, I mean, that would kind of explain why the sudden decision to go from LA to Seattle like that. Like I said, just seems suspicious, but now it seems like we found the reason behind that suspicion. But it's also interesting too because Tom has a very laissez-faire like approach to this whole situation. Like he's kind of a lot like Cassie in that sense. Once again, like Cassie isn't stressed. I mean, she's stressing a little bit, but more so it's like she kind of goes with the flow type of thing. Because even Tom did. He's like, oh, you shouldn't have. You crossed the line when you went behind my back to go to Cassie. He's like, well, I wouldn't have had to go to Cassie if you had told me what she had told you up front. Like, you know, and then Tom's like, fair point to Damien, and it just kind of moves on. Even has that point later on, like, if you're going to get one of the tea bags, I don't mind sharing it, but, like, make sure you put it back. He's like, dude, this is America. I'm drinking coffee. And, you know, it's like, okay. And he just walks away. So it's such an interesting dynamic. I'm curious to figure Tom out. He just seems so lax, you know, and it's going to be interesting to kind of dive into that. You know, I mean, to be fair, this is the pilot, so, you know, things that are in this might not be 100% set in stone. Like, things might change, you know, going from, like, the second episode on. But I'm very interested to kind of see those changes potentially. What I find interesting about, you know, Cassie's whole situation is obviously the whole Abigail situation. And I was like, that's interesting. It's like you're haunted by a ghost because she wants to kick it at your place. It makes you wonder, is it ghosts are naturally drawn to her? Like, is she kind of like a magnet for spirits? Are they automatically drawn to her because she's like a medium or something? Because it doesn't seem like she necessarily has to channel them. But I guess it's a situation of like, maybe she has like some like universal energy that links off of her that draws ghosts to her. But Abigail was kind of kicking it at her place for a while, and obviously we meet, and I like they establish it too, like ghosts can interact with the world, like obviously the way Abigail's kind of moving things. Obviously that takes a dark turn. What I do kind of like the cute kind of like awkward turn of like, oh yeah, what you just did with that dude, that was sex. My grandfather talked about that and stuff, like in movies and stuff like that, and it's gross. And the sad thing is like, oh, that whole scene's kind of a little funny, but now in retrospect it's like, oh yeah, that's actually kind of sad and everything. But we saw kind of, I was wondering about that too, like, is there a period of time like when I'm curious, do ghosts move on, or are they forever just haunting this world? I'm curious about that, because look at Abigail's case of like, okay, so like she was there long enough because she's blaming her newborn like sister, because she's like, mom only gives her crystal attention, and obviously she's getting more and more pissed. So I'm like, is she turning into a vengeful spirit? So it's like, the longer you're here, the more of a vengeful spirit you are. Is there any moving on for anyone, or are you just stuck? Are they stuck wandering the world forever? It's hard to say. Because what was interesting is obviously is like, oh, you're taking all this out on Crystal to the point you're willing to kill a baby, even making the point of being like, oh yeah, the fact of the matter is mom says she should sleep on her back because it'll be safer that way. But accidents could happen. It's almost like it was scary hearing her talk like that. She's like, you didn't leave the TV on because I want to watch cartoons. It's like, and she just like bounces like, because obviously like I think it's a combination of being a kid and not really understanding consequences. Like obviously you're angry, but you're misplacing your anger at somewhere else. But I think it's also being, vengeful, yet being a ghost, yet being a kid, like that whole situation. But it turns out the person she was really bad at was her grandfather, because she doesn't quite remember because she died in her sleep. Because I'm about to bring that up too. Is like, does that mean ghosts don't necessarily remember how they died? It might be a little bit of a blank. Her situation is because of the way she died. It turns out her grandfather's a piece of shit. So, and Cassie confronts him for her and being like, oh, the fact of the matter is, I know what you did. He's like, oh, you from the Innocence Project? I swear I never did any. He's like, just shut up. It's like, I know what you did. The fact is, and it's like, not only did you do that terrible shit, the most messed up one of the messed up things you did was, oh, you left her there. You covered her up for your daughter to find her dead daughter. It's like, that's super messed up for you to do that. You're already a piece of shit. You just added another layer of being a piece of shit. And it's like, oh, Abigail wants you to know that, you'll feel the world kind of shift underneath you, and you'll feel pressure on you when you're trying to sleep. Abigail wants you to know that's her. And so Abigail's there flipping in the courtyard of the prison, and it's like, I guess torturing her grandfather is going to be her new thing. So that's why I'm like, do ghosts move on? Like, is that going to be a thing of like, oh yeah, like I moved on and she's going to move on afterwards? Or is it going to be a thing of like, she's literally going to be there torturing her grandfather until she potentially kills him? Now, and you can see that look on Cassie's face, like she's kind of nervous. Part of me wonders, is it because she's like, I needed to give her a different outlet for her anger, because if not, she would have killed an innocent child. So it's like, hey, your grandfather, turns out he's a piece of shit, so kind of vent all your anger towards him. He's the one that killed you anyway. Is it that type of thing, or is it for her, it's like, maybe it's a combination of like, hey, I'm helping her get justice, and this way also she won't be taking her vengeance out on her mother or her sister. So that's where my mindset's on. But you can definitely tell, even under these circumstances, she kind of felt uneasy, because no matter what he's doing, I think she's still putting Abigail, who's still a kid, even if she is a ghost, putting her in a circumstance where she might end up killing her grandfather. Who knows what that would necessarily do? Maybe that'll give her peace of mind and set her free. Maybe it send her down a darker path. Maybe she won't kill him. Maybe she'll just torture him, because it's like, that's what she's going to do, torture him every day until he dies. Have no idea. And then on top of all this, there's the thing at the end where it's like, okay, the killer from the 90s, that dude is haunting her now too. So it's like, okay, so why now? Because I guess because this case with Mark is connected, and, this one ghost situation draw another ghost, because it's like, oh, she literally just kicked Abigail out, and now she's got another ghost. Worst thing is, like, Abigail was like, oh yeah, she's a kid, and it's like, all right, fine and dandy, but it's like, oh, now you got a serial killer in your place. Not unless we end up finding out he's actually not the serial killer, but obviously with everything that kind of went down, he is. So I think it also shows you, it's not like she gets innocent people all the time. Sometimes there's innocent children and people involved, obviously with her ghost thing, but obviously she gets drawn in and connected to monsters too. And I think that's going to be something interesting we see going forward into the next episode of, like, diving into that more of understanding how that whole situation works. But I think it's kind of a nice start to kind of get your brain working and being like, let me try and figure out how this whole thing, how her medium or ghost powers or abilities, whatever you want to call it, how it really operates. And I'm very interested to see, us dive deeper into that as the series begins, because I watched the trailer. I won't spoil anything. It was a little while ago I saw it. It was like, what, 2 or 3 weeks ago? Maybe I saw it. I don't remember. It's been a little while, but it definitely seemed like there's definitely a sinister side to, like, her abilities and everything, and obviously it takes a toll on her, which is interesting. Like I said, everything else seems like it's a vision, but obviously that one about Shannon being kidnapped, that was more so her. So it's like, even though that was more of a vision, it still happened to her because she was kind of in Shannon's place. So does at certain points do the visions become more real, where it's like, oh, it's not like a separate reality type of vision thing, whether it's like it really starts physically affecting her present day. Like, I'm wondering what are the long-term effects to this. Once again, we'll just have to wait to see what the next episode has in store for us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.